What are some of the challenges facing public transportation agencies, especially small urban and rural transit agencies across America now as we head into 2026? I'm Paul Comfort, and on this episode of Transit Unplugged, we talked to Julie Brown about just that. She is the general manager of the Rogue Valley Transportation District in Southern Oregon, but she's also the president of CTAA, the Community Transportation Association of America. And she also serves as chair of the Oregon Transportation Commission, which oversees the Department of Transportation there in Oregon. She comes to us with a very realistic look at some of the heavy challenges transportation agencies are facing, from funding issues at the state and federal level to the increase of costs to actually run public transportation, how they far outstrip what you may consider normal inflation when it comes to things like driver wages and other wages that are impacting the items and services that they have to procure, to the need for new cybersecurity measures because of all the technology in the vehicles, to increasing insurance costs, and so much more. She unpacks it for us on this episode to let you see really behind the scenes. She pulls the curtain back to see what's really happening behind the scenes of these transit agencies across America in places like she serves, a city of area of just under 200,000 people, just over the border from California to Oregon. Her system has just under 100 vehicles, and they've had to undergo layoffs and other things due to the money coming in being less now than it was when they got this going. And she explains to you why and the impact that certain regulations can have on public transportation agencies. It's a fascinating conversation with Julie Brown unpacking the challenges facing public transit as we head into 2026. All on this episode of Transit Unplugged. Great to be with Julie Brown, the president of the Community Transportation Association of America, and also general manager of the Rogue Valley Transportation District, just over the line from California and Oregon. Great to have you with us, Julie.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, one of our first shows here of the new year, 2026. We thought we'd bring you in, not only in your role as a general manager of a small urban transit system, but also in your role, obviously, as president of CTAA, Community Transportation Association of America. Our listeners know represents small urban, rural, tribal transit, colleges, those kind of things. Scott Bogren's the executive director. He and I have been friends now for probably 35 years, both being involved in this industry. And I was super active and earlier in my career in CTAA and president of our state association. And Julie, you've got quite an interesting background, which we'll dive into in a minute. But you and I were just talking in the green room. There are a lot of issues as we head now into 2026 facing small urban and rural transportation. Let's just dive right in. Tell us what the state of transit is for your agency and ones like yours as we head into this new year.
Paul, it's been a challenge for RVTD and, my agency here, but also in the state of Oregon. In 2017, we were one of the fortunate states that actually had our legislature jump in and decide to start funding transit. And they did that through a 0.1% payroll tax statewide. And each community receives those funds to provide transit in their county. With that said, the idea was they wanted the money to be used for new service, and we were to grow and show what we could do. And 2017 seemed like it was yesterday, but it's been a little bit of time. And what they realized was that ongoing costs were escalating up and that we needed to increase that payroll tax in order to continue the service levels that we were doing. In 2025, our legislature got together and had this conversation, but unfortunately weren't able to come to an agreement, and then had a special session and came up with a 0.1% increase again. Unfortunately, the voters were a little upset about that increase and decided to send this to referendum. And so signatures have been gathered, and it looks like it's going to be on the ballot next year. And so we believe that the funding is going to disappear, that increase anyway.
Yeah.
So with that said, now transit agencies in our state are starting to scramble and look at how we can actually continue providing services in our communities with escalating costs.
Didn't you also mention earlier that that new funding source was to be dedicated just to new services? And so it caused agencies to add all these new services, and now you don't necessarily have the money to keep them running.
That's correct. Yeah. And I think one of the things is transit Prior to that, in 2017, we saw a cliff already. We saw an escalating cost of just providing our basic services. And so this was really a great gift to us, but we also knew what it meant. We knew that if we didn't find a way to fund these, not only our existing services, but our future services, that we were going to be back at the table asking for additional funds.
Yeah. So you went from how many routes to how many routes, and where are you at now when it comes to fixed route, serving your area of about just under 200,000 people?
At the time in 2017, we had about 10 routes. And then we actually built out to 16 routes during that time and added Saturday service. So we were now at 6 days a week and extended evening services. And then because of everything that was happening, we just went through a cut. We laid off 65 employees and we cut from 16 routes back down to 6. So now we're at 6 routes, and it's really, really unfortunate. And we're trying to figure out at this point what we can do locally to be able to put back some of that additional funds.
So let's expand the lens now to nationwide and what's happening at the federal level and how has it impacted your agency?
So at the federal level, I think one of the things that all agencies nationwide experienced was during COVID, we all received funding. So there was a large amount of funding that went forth, and it was able to help all of us sustain ourselves. But also some of the things that have happened since then is the escalating cost of labor. So when you talk about not only transit labor, but labor in general across the nation, take a bus, for example. As you're building a bus, we've seen the cost of a bus go. For us, we use natural gas and diesel hybrids. Natural gas bus cost just under $500,000 in 2017. Today, that is close to about $800,000. For a hybrid bus, you're talking over $1 million, like 1.3. If you go into an full electric bus, it's even more than that. And then hydrogen is just, we won't even talk about hydrogen. But part of that is the cost of labor and the cost of those components that are not only put in the bus, but the fuel types. And so we're looking at trying to do a sustainability build of using different kind of fuel types in our vehicles on top of all these other escalating costs. And it's becoming unattainable for transit agencies to keep pace with replacement of their vehicles.
Wow. And I know that insurance costs have been, subject to inflation and all kinds. Tell us about how insurance costs are affecting you and what the industry is like right now with the providers, et cetera.
There's a couple different things. One is your insurance costs for your employees. So if you have benefit package and healthcare is escalated. I think you hear that at the congressional level right now, that the cost of healthcare for employees or for people in general is expensive and unattainable in a lot of areas. And what is happening, I think, for a lot of transit agencies, we have healthcare that we've been giving to our employees for years and years, and now we're not able to maintain the same level. So I know for RVTD, we just saw an increase from about $3.2 million in all of our insurance, our liability insurance, our healthcare insurance, the vehicle insurance, all of those things go from about 3.2 to 5 million. Well, that's a big chunk of change.
Yes.
And it's something that we can't obtain. So we've had to go back and renegotiate not only with our union, but also with our insurance companies to try to bring that down. In addition to that, for rural areas, a lot of the underwriters for transit vehicles, so we're talking about smaller vehicles, vans, cutaways, some of the smaller buses, has really escalated out of control. And I know for our paratransit side, we use a contractor. They saw an increase of 200% in their liability insurance. And so all of a sudden we were scrambling to try to figure out, is there anybody else that can underwrite these policies and bring it down to an affordable price? And the answer was no. So again, you have to pivot and try to figure out how you're going to come up with that additional funds.
And you've been adding new technology to your vehicles along this way. And now you've run into another problem, which we are all talking about in the industry, which is cybersecurity.
That is correct. Most people don't think about this really about your vehicles. If you are a driver in a few of the states, you saw where the DMV system was hacked. And so your personal information was out there in the dark web. Same thing goes with our fare boxes. So a lot of us have gone to electronic fare to make it quicker and for our riders to be able to just walk up, touch a reader, and pay for their ride. Along with that, a lot of our fare boxes are electronic. If you look at the components inside a bus, everything is electronic, from your destination signs to your annunciation of your stops, etc. And so all of these things have the potential of actually being attacked through a cyber attack. And what is happening is regulatory at the federal level and the state level is actually ratcheting up to the point where you have to look at your technology that you have present. Does it meet that cybersecurity level? And do you have to actually buy something different or put in a different kind of system or firewall to prevent all of those things to happen? And then the one thing that nobody really thinks about is the liability insurance that you have to carry. That if you do have a cybersecurity attack and people's information is given out, you actually have to monitor their credit rating for a couple of years. You have to provide them some assurances that they aren't going to have further attacks into their personal information. So all of that is an added cost that comes to all of us. This is the credit card industry. This is everything, your phone industry. Everybody is experiencing this, but people never really relate it back to transit or how it could impact your transit system.
Thanks for listening to the Transit Unplugged podcast. We are so glad you're here. If you're enjoying this show, we know you'll love our other transit industry programs. On Transit Unplugged TV, Paul Comfort explores the food, culture, and transit systems around the globe. You get to see everything. You'll love this show. And every week, we also offer up the Transit Unplugged News Minute, where you can get the latest industry headlines in less than 60 seconds. You can find out more at transitunplugged.com. Now back to Paul Comfort for this edition of the award-winning Transit Unplugged podcast.
What about federal funding? So we know that as you and I talked today, a couple weeks before the end of the year, but this will be heard the second week of January, Congress is working on reauthorization. There's budget talks going on in D.C. about how much of your funding comes through the FTA and what's the status of that right now?
So for RVTD, it's a little bit over 35% of our funding. So we're really fortunate because we have a three-legged stool. We have a local funding source, we have a state funding source, and then the federal. The federal is really, really difficult, and that's where CTAA kind of falls into. We have a legislative committee that works on these things. We're located in Washington, D.C., where we work on behalf of the transit agencies and go and talk to our legislators on the Hill and talk about what kind of regulatory is being put in place. I'm concerned because whenever there's a reauthorization, there's always a look at how do we make sure that our federal dollars are being spent correctly. They look at things like what should we be monitoring to see the return on investment. And a lot of times it's tied to things like ridership or it's tied to frequency, et cetera. And so all of those things matter. Since COVID, we saw ridership really decrease because of regulatory that was put into place on how many people you could have on a vehicle, what was the distance of people being able to stand next to each other. All those things change your ability to provide. And then, of course, people are working from home. So really now transit is pivoting and trying to figure out where our niche is. Is it in the fixed route system? Is it in a dial demand response system? What do we need to do to provide transportation in our rural areas and our small urban areas, not necessarily our urban areas, because that's a given. You know that you're going to have light rail, you know you're going to have fixed route, et cetera. But in these smaller, we're talking about the rest of the nation, how do we provide transit service and stay within the regulatory requirements? So we're watching it closely, but I'm concerned because there are things that are being proposed that could impact, again, additional funding or funding sources being actually cut. It's not a cheap thing to do anymore as far as providing transit. It never has been, but it is meeting a service of people that have no other way to get around. I think that we somehow have to come up with a human way to tie a human being to those transit trips and the quality of their life to be able to actually be productive in our communities. And so there's a big fight that's going to be going on as we have those conversations. It's easy just to say, well, the ridership isn't there. We're not serving people, not tying it back to, but we're getting people to their dialysis. We're getting people to work so they can be productive.
That's great, Julia. And I couldn't agree with you more. I think that our overemphasis as an industry and those who fund us on ridership has been misplaced. It's really the one KPI that we don't control is how many people ride. What we can control more likely is our safety, our efficiency, our reliability, our customer service, those type of things. And so I'm hearing chirps from Washington that the way we look at and the way we measure the success of public transportation, that policymakers are looking at that saying, you know what, maybe mean distance between failure and ridership and some of these numbers that have been used for a generation aren't really the best way to measure the impact that public transportation has on a community.
And I think the other piece of it is that it's easy to look at numbers for people that are statistical wonks and they want to look at all of the things, all of the different data sets. It's hard to really put a human piece to it. And I think that this falls into where our communities, it's really, really important that they're talking to their lawmakers. I think that that's the piece that we always forget, that their voice does matter. When you pick up that phone and you make that call or you send that email to your legislator, it makes a huge difference because all of a sudden it is a person and it means something. I think the forgotten piece that a lot of people forget is that we have an aging community. I'm one of them. The silver tsunami is happening. And as
Me too.
I get older, I have to start thinking about how am I going to get around? Where do I live? How am I going to be able to meet my needs without relying on my children to drive me? And so they're busy and they're trying to make a living too and have a family and do all those things. And all of a sudden it's like, I want to be as independent as possible and to stay as healthy as possible. So I have to be able to have a system that works. And transportation is the one thing that can keep me from just sitting and costing the taxpayers a lot of money.
Yeah. You've really done, I think, a masterful job of painting some of the challenges that transportation agencies are facing heading into 2026. Do you see any solutions or any positive news on the horizon?
I think that the awareness is getting ratcheted up all the time. I think that unfortunately, there are so many things that everybody is having to look at. And it goes from housing, it goes to, how do they do economic development? How do we keep our nation moving in a positive direction? And we're really at a crossroad. We're going to have to make those hard decisions. And then, it's interesting to me that we've heard a lot of conversation about sustainability and our climate and all of those things have kind of taken a back seat, but they're still there. So I think the one thing I'm trying to stay really positive is that people will start talking to each other about all these things and trying to use an approach that is actually common sense. Now, that's not so common. It's easier just to scream or to really just push one issue. But I know for myself, the other hat that I wear as a state commissioner is trying to build a transportation system that'll work for everybody, from moving freight to moving people. We've got to have all of those pieces in place, and everybody is going to have to help pay for it. That's the one thing I think that we forget is the infrastructure is starting to fail. And transit has experienced this our entire career. We're always looking at trying to keep our infrastructure in good repair, but our roadways are failing. Our electrical grid is failing. Everything is failing all at the same time. And so I think it's actually a great opportunity for us to take a deep breath and really try to approach it differently and try to look at holistically what we can do one piece at a time. So I'm trying to stay optimistic. Do I see that we're going to solve it? No. I hope that people don't throw up their arms and just walk away and say it's too hard. Although it's really easy for me to do that at this point in my career because like you, I've been at this for a long time. And it's time for me to allow the younger boys to come up, but we'll see where it goes. I don't know. I'm holding on for the ride. It's like a roller coaster.
That's interesting. Tell me, you mentioned your role, and I'm glad you did because I wanted to call it out here before we ended. You're chair of the Oregon Transportation Commission. What is that, and what do they do?
So the Oregon Transportation Commission oversees the Department of Transportation in the state of Oregon.
Okay.
So we're lucky in some ways because we're multimodal. We look at everything from bike ped, transit. We look at roads, bridges, freight, rail, light rail, you name
Wow.
it. We have it under our purview. And we're responsible for billions of dollars in the state of Oregon and how we build this. And we're really struggling because our infrastructure in the state of Oregon is failing. And so one of the things that is our job is to make sure that policy is implemented that is sent up from the legislature. Whatever it is, we're going to deal with it and try to incorporate it into our transportation policy. And so we have multiple plans out there. We look at all of this and then we control the budget. And so it's a lot of work. I was appointed by the governor 8 years ago, the prior governor, and I have about 3 years left on the commission. If I'm not removed before then, we'll see. But right now we have huge things that we're looking at, and transit is one of them. And so one of the things in the transportation bill, when ODOT moves a bill at our state level, it includes transit, bike, ped, all of those things that are important to Oregonians. And so it's kind of all wrapped up into one big bill.
Julie Brown, thank you so much for sharing with us some of the challenges as we head into 26 that we need to address and take head on. I think not only at the federal level, but it sounds like you're calling out also state and local to see the value and the importance of public transportation and the impact we have on human lives.
Well, thank you again for having me. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that we can solve our problems going forward.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Transit Unplugged, the world's #1 transit executive podcast. I'm Julie Gates, executive producer of the podcast. Many thanks to the team that makes this show happen. Host and producer Paul Comfort, producer Chris O'Keefe, editor Patrick Emile, associate producer Cindy Raskin. Transit Unplugged is being brought to you by Modaxo, passionate about moving the world's people. If you would enjoy behind-the-scenes insights and updates from the show, sign up for our weekly newsletter, which has links to can't-miss conversations with the biggest names in mobility. Head to transitunplugged.com and scroll to the bottom of the page to sign up. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Transit Unplugged.